Welcome back. My name is Dave and this is Fuzzee Tutorials. Alright, so we're going to continue with our build here. Now in your time this is going to be a few days later, but in my time I'm just continuing on with the build. So we're just going to set this off to the side here so I can get the case out and disassemble it. So I just want to keep this stuff organized as we go. Now for those of you who might want to look at the details of the parts as well as some other systems that I've put together. Haven't built them yet, but I've done the research and I've got some pretty high-end, very carefully curated lists put together on PCPartsPicker.com. And if you wanted to go see those, I'll put a link down in the description. But if you were to go there and just search for Fuzzee D, then you'll find them. Now this is one box and packing that you're going to want to keep as long as you keep this computer, because this is going to make it a lot easier to move. This little tab with the handle out. And the one on the other side. There we go. All right. There's our case manual. All right. Detach some things here. We've got to take everything apart. There's a little wrench wired to the back. It's a little Allen wrench. And I imagine this is going to be for some of the hard drive mounts. Got lots of these already, but and these just uses thumb screws on the back side. They're not captive, so don't drop it like I just did. Okay, that's what that wrench is for. So we're going to leave that plastic on the side panel. It's not tempered glass, it's just acrylic. But as nice as acrylic is, it's adds more cost, and it's also adds more cost to shipping. At least they were nice enough to wire this to the outside. Okay. And there's a little cardboard box in the drive bays there, and that should have a bunch of our screws and stuff. And I love these drive bays. You just squeeze the tabs and they pull right out. And they got some more zip ties, and we've got some screws. And it looks like we got some long fan screws too in here, which is nice. Most fans come with screws, but they don't always. Okay. Now once again, I recommend you take a little time and read the manual. So I'm just going to pause recording here for a little bit. While I do this, I'm not going to make you suffer through me reading. All right, we're back. So we had to take the front panel off. Now this case only comes with one fan, and it's an RGB fan. So I don't want that at the front. I'm going to put that at the back or the top to exhaust. I'm not sure if this will actually fit on the back. We'll have to take a look once we get it out of there. So to do that, and to actually get at the cord, you have to take the front panel off. Which is why, another reason I had to read the manual. There's actually a little lip on the bottom here that you got to grab onto, and you got to really pull quite hard. I don't really like the way this mounts. And in general, although this case has some nice features, it's pretty lightly built, but it is a lower cost case, so it's not like I'm terribly disappointed or feeling like I got ripped off. Would have been nice if it was a little heavier built, but it is what it is. You know, if we had the extra money, we could have got something a little heavier and something that had a basement and more room at the back for hiding cables. So unfortunately, we're not going to be able to hide all the cables with this. I don't know that there's enough room for me to go out the back and then back in different areas to keep things neater. We'll give it a try and see what happens. So the first thing we're going to do is take this fan out. But actually, before we get to that, I just want to show you one other thing. They've got a filter for the power supply. So you just pull that tab down a little bit and it slides out. So for goodness sakes, unless you have some compelling reason why you can't, you should make sure you mount your power supply with the fan side down so that it's going to draw fresh air in from the bottom of the case. Now you just don't want to set this down on carpet unless you put a board or a little box or stand or something to put this on. Otherwise the carpet could conceivably cause more dust to collect around this. Filter point. All right. So, let's take a quick look here at these screws. All right. basic Phillips. So we're going to dig into our little iFixit kit. Now we're using not this absolute smallest Phillips, but we're using a pretty small one in here. Now this is a 120 millimeter fan that comes with this case, but it will accept 140s in the front, but that's the only place you can put them. Now there is a space for 3 fans in front, but if you're going to put a third fan in, you're probably going to want to pull out that 3.5-inch hard drive bay. And yes, it does have screws. Now you could put a slimline fan in there if you wanted to just blow air through here, but leave it in place. Now we need to use this, so we're going to leave it in place, but there's enough room to put 340 millimeter fans. And of course, if you take this out, you could even put a radiator in here for water cooling for either an AIA or custom loop. And you've got room for 220 mil fans in the top. You could also put a radiator in there, but I think it would have to be a slim line because there's not a lot of extra room to accommodate that once you get a motherboard in there with the CPU and everything. So now we'll just see here. This will fit. So it looks like it does indeed fit here. You want to make sure that we got it facing the right way. So we want the fan to exhaust out that port. So we're going to put the label at the back and the wire at the back of the case at the top. Now I'm just going to put the other 3 in loose until they're all 3 in there. That way we won't have any fitment issues. Now I will warn you that sometimes it can make it difficult to get the motherboard in if you put the fan in first. However, you can see with how I'm having to handle this, it'd be very difficult to do with the motherboard in place. Now, at least this way, now that I've got the threads forced in and cut threads in the plastic, if I got to take it out to put the motherboard in, it'll be a lot easier to get back in. Alright, so we're just going to tuck that out of the way for now. And now we're going to put our Noctua fans in there. Now you might be asking, why am I not matching the number of fans outgoing as incoming? Well, there's a good reason for that. We want to create something called positive pressure of air in the case. So we need to have more air going in than the fan that exhausts can take out. Because these cases don't seal up real tight, so you're gonna have a lot of cracks. And if you have a negative air pressure, or sometimes even with a fairly balanced airflow, you're gonna get a lot of dirt and dust migrating into the case, and you don't want that. So by creating a positive pressure like that, it's gonna force air out of the cracks at all times, and that's gonna prevent a lot of dust from building up all over inside your components. And we all know that when dust builds up on your components, it can't shed the heat very effectively, and that shortens the life of your components. All right. Now the nice thing about these Noctua fans is this particular model, it's not built specifically for really high pressure, like high static pressure. It has really good airflow characteristics, but there are other fans that will flow more air. What this fan is very well balanced. So it's going to give you a nice balance between static pressure and airflow. And these are variable speed fans. So you can, with the right software, you can control the speed. That way you'll get a nice balance between cooling and noise. And we've got some extension cables that come with it, which is nice. And these are and they've got some little rubber cushions here for noise dampening. And I just dropped one. It's already got some rubber pads on there, so I probably won't even need them anyway for noise dampening. Okay, now we're going to put these labels side in so that the air gets drawn into the case. It comes with a splitter as well, so that you can hook two fans up to a single spot on the board. It looks like it's also got it might be, oh, I think that's just a short extension cable. No, it says it's a low noise adapter. So, not sure exactly what that means, but. So we're going to route our cable right out through at the front here. If it'll let me. Yeah, it will. There we go. Nice little boxes. But I'm not going to bother saving those. Okay. Well, these certainly go in a lot easier than the other one. You notice I'm putting them in opposite corners. This is just kind of good practice. Just makes everything go in straighter, more evenly. Well, that's just wonderful. They don't have any holes at the top for this fan. So I guess we're just going to have to do this with... now I see what those little rubber feet are for. So we're going to pull this screw back out here. And we're going to put these two little rubber feet in here. Well, I'm not sure if they'll actually go in there or not. So I guess we're going to just have to skip that. Well, that's definitely a mark against this case. Not having proper mounting holes for all four corners. But luckily these are really beefy solid screws. That's just part of the Noctua quality. So I think that's actually going to hold it in there pretty solid. And with the fact that it's got the little rubber feet on all four corners means we shouldn't have any noise problems with it. Okay. So we can put this back on. And it snaps into place. Yeah, I guess I'll hang on to these little rubber feet for something. Now the reason I'm saving this plastic bag is I'm actually going to tape this inside the case along with some other stuff when I'm done with the build for the client. It'll probably get taped back here somewhere. Okay, so I think what we're going to do here is we're going to use this splitter to join these two cables. And they'll only fit together one way. And then we can put a single cable to the motherboard. And I haven't quite decided where I'll put that through here yet. And I'm going to pull these cables back through. That way I can put them just where I want them later. So luckily all these are labeled nicely. And most of them are flat cables, which is nice. No, there's no space at the top there. Well, looks like this case isn't going to let me route them the way I want to anyway. So I guess it's kind of a moot point. All right, let's get that motherboard in there. But before we do that, we gotta put the I/O shield in. Whew. All right, so it's got to go in this hole right here. So you just have to look at the back of the motherboard and you'll see which way you got to put it in. Now it's going to be a snug fit, so you just got to kind of fit it into the space and then force it in place and it'll snap in. Now the newer high-end boards they come with the shield built right onto the motherboard, so you don't have to worry about this. All right. Now this case, it's already got the standoffs mounted. It should be in the correct positions for a standard ATX board. So you just want to make sure when you set the board in there, you check all the holes and make sure they're all lined up in the right spots. Okay. So you want to make sure you got everything lined up on the I/O shield. And make sure you don't have any bent tabs sticking where they shouldn't. And when that's all lined up, it should naturally be lined up on the holes. So we're just going to take our flashlight and double check. Yeah, it looks like we're good. Now what you want to make sure you do when you're doing this is don't tighten the screws down as you're putting them in. Get them all in a couple of turns and then go back and tighten them all down. Otherwise you could have problems getting them all in there. Okay, so after doing a little searching through manuals here to find the right screws, so we've got the little manual that came with the motherboard, or sorry, we've got the little manual that came with the case, and it shows which screws are which. So what we're looking for is, it'll be the only screws that have both the Phillips cross and a straight slot that goes all the way out to the edges of the screw heads. There we go. So now if you've got this particular case, you'll find the page showing all the screw heads and designs on page 4 of the manual. I'll try and do a close-up of that for you. I'll pop that up over top of this. And what we're looking at is those ones right there. Okay, I'm just going to grab a little tray to hold these. Now, something that you may want to use just so you don't lose screws on the floor. You know, I'm just using something that came with one of the fans, but I used to have a dedicated ice cube tray, which works really well for this kind of thing. Now, I don't actually have, for small screwdrivers, I don't have one with a magnetic head at the moment. So just give me a second. And I have a solution that I used to use. Where I took a small rare earth magnet, one of these. It's a neodymium magnet. Man, these are strong magnets. And I just stick it to the side of my screwdriver and you get an instant magnetic screwdriver. Okay. So we're just going to loosely put these screws in. Yeah, this Phillips head is a little bit too small. It keeps rocking the screw. So let me just grab a different head here. From my handy iFixit kit. I'm switching to a number 2. We were using a number 1 Phillips. Yeah, that won't rock around so bad. Okay, I just edited some stuff out there. You didn't need to see me putting in all the rest of the screws because you can't actually see what I'm doing. Now I had to go into my trusty old toolkit and grab one of my long shank screwdrivers. Now, you wouldn't necessarily have to do this, but I'm just having trouble with that little screwdriver in this far corner of the case to get that last screw in. So I'm going to use this long shank one so I don't have alignment problems. There we go. Okay, now that I got all the screws in, just going to do a final adjustment. I'm going to just snug that board up against the back. And then we're going to tighten all these screws down, starting at the ones that run along the back. And you don't need to crank them tight, you just got to snug them up and then go a tiny bit more. To make sure they don't come loose over time with vibrations in the case. Okay, so now let's go ahead and mount in some other stuff here. Now, I'm not going to put the graphics card in yet because I want to get some of the cables attached first. And it's a lot easier to work around putting these cables in when that graphics card isn't in the way, because it's pretty big. So we're going to put our drives in. I'll start with this old spinner drive. Well, I shouldn't say it's old. It's just an older style of technology. It's a brand new drive. So we're going to pull one of these drive bays out here and mount our drive. Now, it's got some little pins in here that we're actually going to line up, and they should line up with the screw holes. Oh, I suppose I got this drive in backwards. Yes, I do. Okay, so on the side of the drive, we've got 3 screw holes on each side. And there's some little plunge pins in here, or I shouldn't say plunge pins, but there's some pins in the side that correspond with those holes. That's going to hold the drive in place. So we're just going to line those up so they go in those screw holes. So this will just snap into place. So we don't actually have to put any screws in this drive to hold it in. And then just slide it in and snaps in place. Now we'll take our SSD, for which a little manual comes with it. I'll be probably looking at that in a minute just to make sure I don't make a mistake putting the cables in. Now these small drives, you could just stick them somewhere with a little double stick tape, but I don't like to do that. Now there's a number of places we could put it. We could put it on the back panel. They've got some spots for that on the back panel. So you could put them right in here somewhere. But since we're leaving this drive bay in here, these actually have the mounting screw holes to put them right in here, I believe. Let me see. Yeah, there we go. Screw right to the bottom. So I'm just going to refer to my little manual here, make sure I use the right screws. Okay, so these are, they've got a tapered head on them with the Phillips. And there we are right there. So now I'm going to go back to my little iFixit here because that big one's a little unwieldy. And these screws are small enough I might need to actually go with the number 0 Phillips. dump a few of the little screws out here. No, 0 is too small, so we'll go back to the number 1. There we go. And where'd my little magnet go? Oh. Okay, and we want our connectors here to go on the back side of this. And once again, we're just going to put them in loosely until all 4 screws are in there. And yes, the cat's wandering around looking for her mom, my wife. No, looks like she's gonna come and say hi to me for a minute. Now we're just snugging these down. Once again, you don't crank them real tight, you just snug them down and then go a little tiny bit more. Okay, and then we slide this one into its slot and snap it into place. Okay. Let's get this out of the way. Once again, we're going to hang on to this box so we're sure everything is working. Okay, so now we're going to start wiring some of this stuff up here. So now luckily, pretty much all of these cables are labeled. So you just have to read them and it'll tell you what they're connecting to. And then to know exactly where to connect them, you're going to want to use your motherboard manual. Now I'll show you a close-up of the motherboard. Whether it's a picture I take or one from the factory, or I might even just snap a picture of what's in the book. But we'll pop that up off to the side here somewhere, so you'll know exactly where to put these. So we're just going to feed these through some holes in the back. So this is our audio cable. So we know that the audio cable connects down in this area on the motherboard on the other side. So I'm just going to run this right up through the back here near that spot. And then we've got our connectors for the power switch and the reset switch and our power LED. It doesn't look like they've got one for drive access activity, which is kind of unfortunate. I like to have those. So now those are all going to go along the bottom of the motherboard here. So we'll put those down through here, through this hole. And this is for our USB 3 Gen 2, and that plugs right at the front of the board if I remember correctly. So we'll put that through right there. And now this goes to our two Noctua fans at the front. So I think we're probably going to use that fan header that's near the bottom of the board. So I'm going to put that through the same place as I put the HD audio cable. Okay. So I know you can't really see what I'm doing, and I don't have the extra camera equipment to do an overhead view. So I can tell you that the audio cable is in this bottom lower corner right near the back. And if you look real close at the end, I'll try and zoom in on this, hopefully it'll stay clear enough. There's actually a little spot where it's got one of the holes is plugged off. So that way you can't put this on wrong. So you just have to look where the missing pin is on the header and line up where that plug pin spot is going to go. And just push it on gently. If it doesn't go, there's something wrong. So that's on there. And we've got one of our system fan plugs down in the same area. And now it's got that little tab that sticks up behind the pins, and it's got a matching little groove on the back of the plug. So you just have to line those up so you can't put it in wrong. Now if you have some older peripherals that you still want to use, like if you're upgrading your system, or even if you're building a whole new system, but you've got, say an old parallel printer that you want to hook up, or maybe you've got an old serial pin printer that you're using for your business for multi-part forms, you might still have need of that. Now this particular motherboard does support those, so you'll need some adapters for that, but they've got plugs or headers for them on the motherboard, so you can plug in a serial port, an old style serial port, and you can plug in a parallel printer port on this board. You might have an old scanner that still is quite serviceable and does a high enough resolution that you may want to plug into the old system. So that's typically where you would still have use of that kind of thing. Okay, so now on the bottom end of this board, on the right hand side, is our connectors for the power switch and reset and all that. And you've got two rows of pins that go this way, but the actual plugs go across the two rows. So you just have to keep that in mind. And once again, if you're in doubt as to which goes where, you're looking for a little arrow indicator, or the plus sign, or a number 1. And this one has an arrow on it, and the arrow will go to the positive side on the rows of pins. Now these aren't labeled other than just numbers, so I'm going to have to pop out the manual again here and take a look. And this is why you want to keep this handy. Now if you've been doing this a lot, you're going to remember where they go, but like I said, it's been 15 years since I built one, so I just don't remember this stuff off the top of my head anymore. Looks like, so the first set of pins on there, pins 1 and 2, aren't going to be used because they're for the hard drive light. So the first one that's going to be used here is for power. So that's going to be pins 2 and 4. Well, actually, the power switch doesn't really matter, because all it's doing when you hit the switch is shorting the 2 pins. You could actually just short them with a screwdriver to turn it on when you're in test mode. Okay, and our reset switch is going to go right below that, but let's do the power LED light here first. And then our reset switch is going to go on the 2 pins right below our power switch. All right. Now we've still got our case fan at the back, so I've got to find a fan header for that. Now since we already used the System Fan 2 plug, on the bottom for our front fans, we're going to use the one that's right next to, or right near the CPU. And once again, you just have to line up that little groove on the back with the tab behind the pins. You can't put them in wrong. I don't know what's going on here. Oh, I guess that won't fit on there. Oh, this one goes on a 3-pin connector. Okay. Oh, it might actually still fit on there. But I'm not going to just... Oh, it looks like all the system fan plugs are 4-pin. Alright. I'm going to plug this in for now, but I'm going to check the manual here in just a second, just to make sure I can do it this way. I might have to actually use a converter plug for this. It looks like it's going to plug on there fine. Okay, so I'm just going to double check that. Okay, so I just noticed a discrepancy in the book here. In the book it shows that there's a USB 2.0 cable, but there actually isn't. That cable is actually not on this case, so this must be an older book. They've obviously updated the design. And the USB 3 connector has now got 2 cables running to it. So now I believe that this is actually meant for the USB 3.1, which is a slightly different connector. Okay, so that's just along the front here. Yeah, I'm verifying that it fits properly. So there's actually 2 headers on the board you can plug this into, but we're going to use the one on the front. And there is another missing pin scenario that you have to line up with the plug pin. There's also a little notch in the top of the plug that you line up with a little tab on the cord itself. And it's a bit of a firm fit. You have to make sure you get it seated all the way. Okay, so we've got all those connected. All right, I was going to verify that we can still connect that fan up the way I did there before anything gets turned on. Okay, so that 4th pin, that's for variable speed fans. That's the speed control signal. So yeah, we can plug it in the way I did on that 4-pin connector. Like the connector on the board is 4-pin, but the connector on that fan was only 3-pin because it's not variable speed. So that's fine, it can be plugged in the way I did. But I just wanted to verify that, because we didn't have variable speed fans back in the day. At least not that could be controlled off the motherboard. Okay, so now I'm going to do some cable management here. So we're going to pull these back through until they're just kind of snug. And we're going to make use of some of these zip ties. So I'm actually going to zip tie these right near the motherboard here, just to get them grouped nicely. You don't want to go too close and bend pins or anything, so I'm going to keep it a couple inches back, or about 5 centimeters back. Oh. Helps if I put this through the right way. Yeah, that's better. And we'll cut that tail off. And the audio cable and that fan cable, I'm going to just zip tie those together to keep them neat. Now I'm actually going to pull that USB connector back off the board. I'm going to run it through a different hole. The reason I'm doing that is because of how far that plug sticks out before the cable can bend. I don't want to put stress on that point on the motherboard, so this will. It's always good to be tidy with your cabling, but you also got to make sure you're not putting stress on the connectors. All right. There. That's better. Okay, I gotta try and keep this angled so you can still see it. All right, so it looks like we've got enough length on these cables that we can kind of run them all along the bottom here. Some of these ones just tuck down into this little bottom channel. I don't think we're even going to need to zip tie those. But I am going to zip tie these two together here above that groove. And then we'll tuck this down into the groove here. Okay, now we're just gonna bunch all these together and we'll zip tie that. We'll put a couple zip ties back here. We'll go one up a little higher. Oh, I gotta be careful. There's very little room back here. I'm gonna make sure we kind of keep these cables in this channel. So we'll run another zip tie here, but this time we're going to go around this little bar so that we're zip tying it right to the case. We want to get that down as low as we can. But we don't want it too tight because it's still got to kind of fit in this channel over here. Clip off a couple ends. Now we're going to put one last zip tie. right down here. Now this one might be a little small to fight with. So I'm going to grab a bigger one here. Oh, I don't know if my scissors are going to cut this. There we go. And we'll just tuck the ends of those down. There, I suppose I could put another zip tie in there, but I'm going to have some more stuff to zip tie here in a couple minutes, so. No, that just bugs me. Now you might ask yourself, is this really necessary? And my answer to that is, well, yes. Could you just leave the cords in a mesh? Sure you could. Now, aside from the neatness aspect of this, there's something else you need to consider, and that is down the road, if you need to do some upgrades on this, or you bring in a professional to work on it, it's going to be a whole lot easier and less time consuming for them to work on it. And if you're hiring a professional especially, you're paying them by the hour, and their hourly rate is not cheap. It's probably going to be running you somewhere between 75 and 100 bucks an hour. So every bit of time you can save them and make things easier for them to troubleshoot and trace stuff around, the more money that's going to save you, and the more it's going to make life easier on you if you're doing the work a year or two down the road, trying to add stuff or problem solve. So I think cable management is an absolute must. Now some guys like to put all the wiring in and then manage it, but I find it much easier and neater to do it this way as you go. Okay, so now we've got all that taken care of, so now it's time for the power supply. Okay. And our trusty little spec sheet that we're going to want. Now we're not going to need all of these cables, but I'm just going to set them off here right now, and then we'll figure out which ones we're going to need, and then we'll just put the rest back in the box. Let's keep this bag handy. I'll probably just wind up giving this bag to the customer with the extra cables in it. I'd rather him be responsible for the cables than me. Truth be told, we had to do a bunch of moving around and reorganizing just to open up space to set up this table to do this build. Something we've been meaning to do for years, but we moved from quite a large house into here, and then we had to give up our storage container a couple of years ago, and we never did organize after that. So this has kind of forced us to do it. Now you notice we've got a fan grill here, and then there's one at the back, of course. Now this fan grill, we want to put down to where that grill is in the bottom here, where I showed you the location of that filter. And if you didn't see that part, then you'll need to go back to that first video. You can probably find it in the computer build playlist, or I'll put a up at the top of the screen here. I'll put in a card at the top, and you can go back and take a look at that if you want to, and then come back and carry on from here. So I'm just double checking to make sure everything can fit down here. So we might actually have a problem with the way I put the cabling in. I might wind up having to reroute some of these cables. Well, I guess there's no might about it. I'm going to have to. Can't put them in there. Well, that's kind of unfortunate. They stuck a hole right there where the power supply needs to mount. That was kind of short-sighted of them. Okay. So these are the kinds of things you run across when you're doing this kind of work. When you're working with a case you've never worked with before. Don't think I'm going to have to actually cut any of the zip ties. Just have to unplug these from the board and bring them in a different slot. So they should be good here. Check to make sure I plugged them in right. Yeah, okay. Now we'll just double check here. Make sure this is going to slide in place now. Okay, looks like we're good. So I'll wait until I get the power supply all bolted in before I do some final cable management back here. Okay, so we're going to need our main power cable for the motherboard. And we're also going to need the CPU power. Now I probably don't need to plug in both of these cables, but I'm always one to, if there's a place to plug something, I like to plug it in. That way if a person upgrades later, they don't have to worry about trying to snake another cable through there to add more motherboard power. Say if he added a second video card to the system or something like that. Because when you add another video card, there's not just power on the video card you got to plug in, it's also drawing power from the motherboard, which is why we have these connectors to the motherboard nowadays. And where they plug into the power supply, everything's labeled, and the cables are labeled, which end goes on the actual power supply. Have to look at the ends of the cables and it'll tell you how to plug them into the power supply. Okay, now we need the main motherboard power. Now I'm hoping there's going to be enough cable for me to run it out that hole in the bottom of the case, around the back, and then back through the back panel to where it's got to plug into the motherboard. It'll be a much neater solution. So we're going to try that. Now, there's actually 2 plugs for this on the power supply, and it goes to 1 connector on the motherboard. So it can be a little finicky to get installed in here. You have to make sure that those little tabs click into place. So they're not going to click into place until the cable's fully seated. Okay, so now we need our connectors for the video cards. Now these are kind of a funny cable. You have to accommodate a lot of different styles of plugs on the video cards, so they've got these little kind of split ends here. So these are the ones that are going to the video cards, and I'll have to actually double check here on the card because I don't remember off the top of my head if we have 1 or 2 connectors. So it looks like we just have a single connector, so I'm only going to plug in 1 cord. Now it does have a couple extra spots here to plug it in, but they're all the same. And since I've got an extra one down here, I'll just simplify things. Oh, this has got 2 ends on it anyway, so. Just leave those other 2 spots open. Okay, now we've got 2 spots we can plug in SATA power. And I think we're going to need one of these a little bit longer SATA power cords. Let's see here. At least I hope that one of them is a little longer. No, that's Molex. Yeah, I think this is a longer one. That's another Molex one. Okay. Well, hopefully this is going to be long enough, so I only have to run 1. I'm just going to kind of double check here and make sure. Oh yeah, we got lots of cable length there. All right. So I'm going to leave the outside ones open, just so if somebody has to plug in another cable in the future, it's easier for them. They won't have to remove the power supply to do it. Okay, so we've got all the cabling there that we're going to need. So I'm just going to tuck these away. Gonna put these screws in here. Now, one of these cables does actually still have floppy drive power, but of course we don't have a floppy drive anywhere in sight on this computer. I still got one in this old one, but here we are. And there's our Velcro cable ties, and some more zip ties. Now these also have hex heads on them. Oh, this one is actually for standoff studs. I do have a screwdriver that fits these, but actually, if I remember correctly, I think the receptacle for this screw head fits these. Yes, it does. It's a perfect fit. So I'm actually going to do that. Because these are screws you want to put in pretty tight. Okay. Now I do want to look up something real quick here for the power supply. There's actually a push button switch on the back for standard and hybrid. Now I think hybrid mode allows the CPU, allows the PSU fan to be off when it's not under load. But I just wanted to verify it, but it doesn't talk about that in here. So I'm just gonna, there was another piece of paper in here, I think it was just a warranty card, but just want to double check. Yeah, it's just a warranty card. I guess that'll be easy enough to find out when we fire it up. Okay, so we're going to take these cables and except for the ones that go to the graphics card. Everything else, which I'll set off to the side here, everything else we're going to run through a hole in the back and then bring them back through as we need them for the sake of neatness. So we'll stick them all through this hole. Now my biggest worry is that we're not going to be able to put the back of the case, or the back panel of the case back on with these cables in the way, but we'll see. Now I am going to put this one for the hard drive power and the SSD power through a slightly different hole. Hopefully this is going to be long enough. We can run out and back in. Hold on, let's get this out of the way. We're going to knock it on the floor. Okay. So you can see there which cables I run where. And I just flipped my Velcro ties onto the ground. Okay, so I guess the first thing we're gonna worry about here is running power up for the CPU. Put those through this top hole here. Oh boy, this is going to be tough. Okay. I will probably skip past this. I'll edit this out because there's no point in you watching me struggle with this for a while. And even if I had the extra cameras, I couldn't get one in there for you to see what I'm doing. And ooh, it's barely gonna reach. I gotta make darn sure these are really seated in there all the way. There we go. Double check here. This is all seated fully and correctly. Be very careful when you're doing this. You don't want it to slip off and hit the motherboard when you're pushing. That would be bad. Okay. Wow, that was a tight fit. Okay, we got that in there. And that is actually pretty nice and neat and clean. So next, we got to put through the power for the motherboard. And I think I'm going to actually run that up through here if it'll fit. Now once again, there's a little tab both on the plug and a little lip, tiny little short lip that tab goes over and snaps into. On the actual motherboard connector. You just have to make sure you get that all lined up straight before you try and push it in there. And you should hear it snap into place, and it should be, the plug on the cable itself should be fully seated against the plug on the motherboard. Okay, so that fit in there. Now we just got to connect up the power for the drives. Alright, there are ridges on there so that you can only put it in one way. Okay. So for neatness, I'm going to use these last two connectors. Now I've never worked with a SATA drive, but I'm told these connectors on the back of the drive are very delicate. So don't force anything. And any up and down pressure this way can break them off very easily, or so I've seen. That's what my research tells me. I've never dealt with this, so just be very, very careful here. Make sure that the little ridges line up with the grooves in the right spots before you try and push anything in. It is a fairly stiff connection. Okay, so I'm just going to gently bend those wires over so that I can tuck these out of the way. Okay, so for a little cable management here, I'm going to zip tie this excess SATA cabling here, SATA power cabling to be precise. And we'll gently, very gently, tuck these out of the way into that drive bay. Okay, now I'm going to make use of these nice Velcro ties here. Okay. We have to be mindful here of, we can't just bunch them up. We have to actually kind of bring them inside beside each other. And we'll use one of these little okay.
just going to tie these down kind of flat. And then run them through this little tie down thing on the back. Okay. And we'll just tuck these wires back down into that groove there. So I think we're in pretty good shape. That's pretty neat and tidy. It should be easy to follow everything in the future. Luckily, we don't have a bunch of RGB cabling to worry about. So here's our data cables for our SATA drives. Okay, and these go on this end of the motherboard, right on the edge. There's 6 SATA connectors there. Okay, and once again, we've got grooves and ridges that have to be matched up. To make sure they go in the right way. Okay, now this one's got a corner right angle connector on it, so I'm going to put that one in the bottom. And no, that's not going to work. Use the other end because that hole in the back plane is just not in the right spot. All right, that's snapped in. And we'll do this from the front and then push the cable through for the... I'm using ones right above the other, so it's easy to get to the other ones for later upgrades. And then we'll pull this through. Okay. Once again, you just got to match up the grooves and ridges. They actually are pretty simple to plug in once you just take a minute to look at everything closely. And actually, I'm going to use that right angle one on the bottom. It's going to be more useful there anyway. Keep it out of the way of the other one. You got to make sure you seat them all the way in until that little metal tab clips in. And to get them back out, you got to squeeze that little metal tab down. Okay, a couple more zip ties. Actually, let's kind of group all these together here. We gotta leave enough slack so that we can tuck them in underneath the drive cage. Sometimes this can be finicky work. Okay. Now, one thing you got to remember when you're doing this, it's kind of important. You want to fold the cables, not coil them. If you coil them, you can actually create a magnetic field which will cause radio interference and cause issues with your signal. So don't coil your cables, fold them. Ask me how I know. Okay. That should tuck in there okay. I'll put one more zip tie around this whole bunch of stuff here. And I'm actually gonna see if I can actually clip it right to the, oh no, there's really nothing to clip it to. All right, so just wrap all these cables together here. Okay, so we just have to make sure that everything's going to be able to squash down flat enough to put that back panel on. So I'm just kind of double checking stuff here. Just kind of reordering things a little bit. So there's actually a little indentation kind of here that runs down where you want to make sure everything's going to fit into for that back panel. Okay, I think we're good. Oh, I do believe we've got everything connected except for the video card. Okay, so now there is actually a little bracket right here that helps strengthen the back of the case to prevent your GPU sag, your video card sag. So we've got to remove that first. Okay, and then we've got to remove a couple of slots here. Now, this is a 2-slot card, so we're going to remove not the top slot, but we're going to remove the next 2 to make room. Oop, let's pull that magnet off of there. Just as a kind of a side note, if you don't want to, I use this one because it's something I had kicking around from woodworking projects, but you can get smaller ones. You can get one small enough, they'll fit right down inside here underneath this. Now there's lots of places you can get these. I get my magnets from a place called Lee Valley Tools. They're a woodworking supply, and they've got tons of different types of these magnets, and they're all very high quality neodymium rare earth magnets, and they're at a really good price. I haven't found them cheaper anywhere else, at least not for that level of quality. Sometimes these screws can be a little stiff when everything's new. All right, now some guys that do this on YouTube do it while it's still up, but I'm just not comfortable doing that. But actually, I wanted to point out something real quick here. Right at the back of this slot where we're going to plug the card in, there's a couple little plastic tabs, and you got to push those down out of the way, and then they'll snap back into place when the card's fully seated. Okay. I'm just going to make sure everything's lined up good. Oh, I forgot. Rookie mistake, because I haven't dealt with these new video cards before. They actually come with a little protector, or a lot of them do anyway, the better ones. They'll come with a little protector that you got to pull off of the blade. So don't forget that like I just did. So you just got to get it worked into position. And it'll snap into place. And you just want to keep an eye and ear for those little tabs that snap up when the card's fully seated, and you should be good. And we just want to make sure these are lined up so everything is as perfectly straight up and down as we can get it. I didn't have my magnet on there. Okay. Well, I'm gonna, just because this magnet's gonna get in the way, I'm gonna switch to my long shank screwdriver that's got a built-in magnetic tip, just to make life a little easier on myself. Now, in case you're wondering where you get these, there are all kinds of places you can get them, but I actually got mine, believe it or not, at my local Totem Building Supplies. But I imagine you could probably also find them at any of your larger hardware places like Home Hardware or Lowe's, or if you, I think in the States they still have Aiken heads. There are specialty places that you can order these online, these long shank drivers, but they're pretty pricey when you order them that way for some reason. I think I only paid about 12 bucks a piece for these. These are Master All brand, They're not particularly strong, but for what I was using them for, they're plenty good enough. And they gave me the reach, which nice and thin to get into tight spaces, where sometimes if you're using extensions, you just can't get into those places. Okay, so now let's put our reinforcement bracket back in. Now there actually is a way you can put a magnetic charge into these and they'll last for a while. If you just take your magnet and you scrape it along the edge several times. I'd actually forgotten about that until just now. It will hold a charge, just not as strong, and it doesn't last forever. It'll last for a little while, and that's kind of why I got in the habit of just doing it this way for my non-magnet ones. Okay, so now we just have one cable left to hook up. It comes from our power supply. Now this is an 8-pin connector, and these, it's actually got a 6-pin and a 2-pin, and you just have to kind of lock them together. You just kind of push them together, and you've got to hold them while you put them in place. It can be a little finicky. Oh, and in case you're wondering which way I'm putting this in, you notice there's a little tab on the back here, and there's a corresponding notch in the back of the connector. You just got to get them to all seat at the same time. And that little tab will click into place, and you have to squeeze into that tab to get them back out. Okay, I'm just going to do a little final cable management here. I mean, we could just kind of stick it down out of the way, but it's not the way I like to do things. So, let me grab another zip tie here. Or as the Verge likes to call them, tweezers. So I'm actually going to run this through the drive cage so that it'll kind of hold it in position there. It can be a little troublesome getting it around there, but it's worth it in the end. Okay. It's one thing getting it through, it's another thing keeping it through there. And actually, because it's so hard to do sometimes, I'm going to actually just put it around the cable once. I'm going to tighten that one up. And then I don't have to worry about it. I'll just trim that tail off. We'll grab another one, and then when we tie the cable to itself, we don't have to worry about trying to get it around that drive cage rail. Or more precisely, rail mount. Okay. Now, sorry, I'm not as adept at some of the more experienced YouTubers at keeping this angle to the camera so you can see what I'm doing. But I'm folding the cable on itself in a Z shape. And then I'm going to push it all down closer to that earlier tie point so that it holds it in place. And then we'll pull it tight. Okay. And then we've got this little tail that's sticking out that I'm just gonna tuck back in behind and zip tie that to the cable. Oh, cable backwards. Now I just want to hold that in place so it kind of stays hidden when I've got the side panel on, as much as possible anyway. There's so much you can do with these if you don't have those fancy cable extensions from like Asia Horse or cablemods.com or something. Okay, looks like we got everything together. Now I'm not going to put the side panels on at this point because I need to post the system. Now I'm going to have to take a little break here for my back. I've got back problems, but I'm not going to make you wait for another video. I'll come back after I rest for a bit and we'll do a post and we'll make some adjustments in the BIOS. I'll show you how to do all that as best I can. I don't have an external capture card to go between the video card and the monitor, so I'll have to just try and place my phone and tripod to show the screen kind of over my shoulder while I'm working until I've got enough OS installed that I can put on OBS and do a screen recording for you. But I'm going to take you through all of that, but what I'm going to tack on to the end of this video before it gets published is doing the post and actually setting up. There's a few little things that we need to do in the BIOS. Now I tried to get the latest BIOS for this motherboard because it's good practice to always update the BIOS to the latest version. Now the motherboard manufacturers might tell you otherwise, but myself, I've always believed it's wise to have the latest BIOS in there. And my friend Kerry Holtzman on his channel, he also is pretty adamant about doing that. Now he had an interesting problem a while ago that actually I'll take a minute to tell you about because it's something you might run into. Now it is specific only to gigabyte motherboards, but and they haven't fixed it in the BIOS upgrades on most of the boards. There's only some of the newest ones that they fixed it on. And what it is every other motherboard manufacturer will do a range check on the date on the motherboard. And the reason that that's important is he had a situation, and he's had a couple of clients that had the same situation, where it set the date erroneously to, like, instead of 2020 it set it to 3020. And when you do a Windows install with the date like that, of course it pulls the date from the system BIOS and uses that as part of the install when it first starts doing the install. But when it goes to actually run, you'll get a blue screen and it'll puke all over you and you won't be able to figure out why. And it's actually Windows can't operate with that kind of a date range. It's got a much narrower set of dates it can work within. And where the problem really gets serious is even if you swap out a different brand, a motherboard, where the date's not an issue, that erroneous date has been embedded into the Windows install. So what you wind up having to do is, after you fix the date issue at the motherboard level, you then have to format the drive and do it all over again. I've heard horror stories of people having to, they've swapped everything piece by piece in the system and haven't been able to figure out what the problem is, and cost themselves thousands of dollars in time and parts replacement and that kind of thing. So if you ever run into a weird problem like that, check the date on the motherboard, and that's your solution. So you can thank Kerry Holtzman for that. You can also thank Kerry Holtzman for getting in touch with Gigabyte and getting them to fix the BIOS on at least their newer higher end motherboards. But they don't seem inclined to fix it on older ones. But they're the only motherboard manufacturer that we know of at this point that ever has had that problem. So anyway, I'm going to go take a little break, and we'll come back and we'll do our post and some changes in the BIOS to optimize for the memory that we put in there to get it operating at its full potential, and check a few other things. While I'm taking my break, I'm going to see if their website's up for where I get the BIOS for this board. I couldn't get it the other day before I started this build, and I'll take you through that part, and then the video is going to end, and then the third video is going to be, or I guess it would be the second video. I changed my plans a little bit. So anyway, the next video after that will be installing Windows 10 Professional and putting on some software and doing some optimizing and debloating and that kind of thing. And I'll take you through doing all that. So, from your perspective, I'll see you in a minute. Okay, we're back from our break. Now, I had actually forgotten to install something on this machine, so we're going to do that now before we do our post. So what we forgot here was to put in the Wi-Fi card. So we're going to do that right now. So the first thing I need to do is decide which slot I'm going to put it in. So there's actually there's 4 slots I can put it in, but there's only then there's two PCIe by 16 and then a couple of the short ones. So we're going to use up one of the short ones here. Oh, here we go. All right. So this is our little Wi-Fi card. So I just gotta double check which slot cover to take out. Okay. Now there's no sense in putting it right next to the graphics card, so put it on the next short slot over. So I've got to pull that little reinforcement bracket off here. And then we'll pull the, let me use this one here, we'll pull that extra slot cover out. Okay. Oh, actually, before I put this in, I just got to refer to the manual here and make sure I pick the right motherboard header. I'm pretty sure it's just a USB 2 header, but I want to make sure. Now this plug that goes on the motherboard is for the Bluetooth. If you're not going to use the Bluetooth, you don't even have to plug the cord in if you don't want to. Yeah, it is indeed just a standard USB port, so I've just got a header, so I just got to find the right one. Okay, let's leave that out of the way for a minute. And slip this card in. Now, unlike where the video cards plug in, there's no little tab to flip up or anything. You just press it into the slot and just take care to make sure it is fully seated. What do I do with that screw? This. Now there is a little bit of play where these screw holes are, so what you want to do is just reach down and push that little bracket tab all the way to the back and make sure it's as perfectly straight up and down as you can before you cinch that down. Once again, you just need to snug it. You don't need to put 40 pounds of torque on it or anything. Just make sure that connector cord is fully seated. And we're going to dig out another zip tie here and tidy that hanging cord down. Once again, being careful to fold it back and forth and not wrap it in a coil, which is something like this type of a cord is kind of a natural to want to do. So you just have to resist that notion. And because of it being a fairly big fold, I'm actually going to put 2 of these on here just to keep it nice and neat. So now I couldn't really get another loop in there while I was trying to get the initial one on, and I've got a little bit too long extra cord hanging out there, so I'm actually going to put a third zip tie in. Now if you're concerned about having it overloaded with zip ties, you just put another one on and then cut away the extra one you don't need. I see too many guys, they'll cut it off and then fight with it trying to get another one on, instead of just putting another one on and then cutting the other one off. Make your life a lot easier. In this case though, I'm going to leave all three on because this one's actually going to go about halfway between the other two, just to keep things from flopping around. Give a little more slack there. Okay. All right. Now we'll just do a final check and make sure everything's still fully seated. Sometimes you can pull them just enough that it'll cause communication problems. So I've learned that from hard experience. All right. Okay. And everything still looks neat and tidy there. Slide that up a bit so you can see it better. I'll try and zoom in on this now that it's all done so you can get a good picture of it. I did take some photographs that I'll probably overlay over top of the video here if it doesn't zoom in clear enough. All right, now I'm not going to bother putting any of the side panels on yet until we do a successful post, because then I would just have to take everything apart again. Oh yes, I gotta put this bracket back in. Okay. Now we're basically ready for our post. So we're going to break out our monitor here, but first let me make a little room, tidy stuff up. Now I'm not tidying stuff up just because I'm making a video. This is something I would be doing anyway. I've had too many times in the past where I didn't keep stuff clean, and then I would lose track of something and I would spend a half an hour trying to find it. So by just taking a little time and tidying stuff up, you usually avoid those problems. All right, now we've got a little room to work with. Set up our monitor. Now the reason I'm not just grabbing one of my monitors from my system here is they're all too old really to hook up to this. I don't think I'd even have the right connectors on those old monitors to hook up to this, so once again, until you're sure that these monitors are working and they've been working for a couple of months, you want to keep these boxes. And it might be a wise decision to keep at least one of these boxes in case 6 months or a year down the road, one of these breaks. Certainly wouldn't be a bad thing. Okay, I'm going to keep this out for a little bit so I can set it on the desk without scratching it. Alright, so we'll lay this down so we can put the face down here, put the stand on. That's a pretty easy assembly on these. Just a couple of tabs you fit in there and you put it in the hole. And we put these screws in. Now there is a CD with the manual on it. Now for the purposes of initial installation here, we're not going to set up the second monitor. But once I get Windows installed, then I will hook it up. And just attach the base to the stem. And the screw on here has actually got it's a captive thumb screw. You can use a flat blade screwdriver on it, but don't really need to. Just gonna be taking these apart for sending them to my client anyway. And that's our monitor. Now these are just a basic cheap stand. You don't have any adjustments, so if you want to raise it, you're going to have to get a little monitor stand to put it on. So the connector cable that comes with these is HDMI. And no, they're not HDMI 2.1. You'd have no need for it on a 1080p only monitor. Now it's always good to use a power bar with basic circuit protection in it, or surge protection I should say. And that is especially important if you're out in the country or something, where power is notoriously bad for spiking.
You want to make sure that you've got your power bar turned off at this point while you're starting to plug stuff in. Just good practice. Sometimes stuff happens. That's not too bad of a size little power brick. So on the back of this monitor, you've got, of course, the HDMI plug. You've got an old style D-sub, which is 3 rows of pins, VGA, old style VGA plug. And you've also got a headphone jack on the back should you want to use it. And of course, you've got a spot to plug in your power. Now, there's no cable management options with these monitors, but with this little stand here, you could probably just zip tie your cables down to it. And of course, I'm not going to bother because I'm only going to be packaging all this stuff up again. Okay, I guess I better turn this around so I can see it. Well, I have to say I'm not overly happy about the slight forward tilt this seems to put on the screen. I would like to have it actually tilted up a little bit, but there's not much we can do about that at this point. Now, I guess there's not much point in me showing you this. You know, it's not going to show up on camera anyway, but there's 4 little plugs in the ports on this card just to protect them. We're going to pull one out. And we got to find the HDMI plugs. Okay. Oh, you've got to be kidding me. Oh, there we go. Huh. Well, that's unexpected. Huh. Well, that's going to be a problem. There's actually only one HDMI plug on this card. I expected there to be 2 display ports and 2 HDMI ports. Most cards are built that way. And to be honest, I didn't research the connectors available on this specific brand, but I did check out other 5500 XT cards. So I guess before I test the dual monitor setup, I will have to get a converter. So we'll just save that for now. And just plug the computer in.
Okay. And you want to make sure your power supply is turned off as well, which I've already done. Okay. So I'll turn this towards the camera here so you can see everything light up along with me. So we'll turn the power supply on. Hit the power button. Oh, I forgot to turn the power bar on. Then I need to find the power switch on the monitor here too. Oh, there it is. Okay, so turn the power bar on. Fire up the monitor. Okay, and then I'll have to grab a keyboard and a mouse. And the last time I did this, there were only a handful of BIOSes out there that had mouse capability, but now they pretty much all do. So we might as well make life easy on ourselves. Now I don't have a splitter. It's only got a single unified PS2 plug on here. So I'm going to plug the mouse into it, and then I'm going to plug the keyboard into a converter and use one of the USB ports. Yeah, it's been a while since I've played with these. Okay. All right, now I just have to remember where I put that. It is. Now I suppose, like, I never had the need for it at the time, but uh-oh, this is the wrong type of converter. This plugs into a PS2 port. Unless we plug in a USB keyboard. Well, we'll just have to go mouseless here for a minute, and then I will go grab my wireless mouse once I get the BIOS and everything upgraded. Okay. Let me put this back so I don't lose it. I got rid of a bunch of stuff here lately. Well, actually a few years ago. I used to have a USB keyboard that we could have used for this. All right, let's hit the power here. And double check, make sure all the fans are spinning. Yes, they are. And everything's nice and quiet. Okay. Now, the first time you're booting up your system like this, it's natural for things to take a while because it has to do, the first time it does a post or power on self test, it's going to do it several times. And that's especially true of AMD Ryzen systems or any AMD system. Well, we might actually have an error code here. I see some lights on the motherboard that aren't changing. But we'll just give it a couple minutes. While that's happening, I'm going to grab that motherboard manual back out. We'll have to look up our LED codes. There's no actual number readout on here, it's just a combination of LED lights. Oh, there we go. Actually, it is booted. So we're going to hit F1, setup. Okay. Okay, so I'm just going to pause recording here for a little bit while I reset up the camera so you can see this screen.